What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the show. And if you're watching me on YouTube, welcome back to the channel. You guys, it's my last few days here in Tulum. So emotional. We're literally like soaking up every bit of magic that we can before our season here ends. And I'm going to be recording my last few episodes here as well, because on Monday, I've decided to go back to Italy for the next, we'll say about 10 days until I'm off to my next location. And it's gonna be a 33-hour travel day. Like, I don't know if I'm gonna make it. Like, I am crossing my fingers because it is gonna be such an adventure. I'll take you guys with me on Instagram, but I feel like we're gonna have a lot of fun doing it. So I think it's gonna be fine. But I'm excited about it because it's always, we love an adventure. Life is an adventure. Life gets to be an adventure. All right. So for today's episode, I'm excited because I feel like this is probably one of the most common topics that comes up when I'm working with or talking to female entrepreneurs. And it is something that is also so close to my heart in terms of my own journey and my own growth. Many of us who are female entrepreneurs who have decided to embark on the journey that is becoming our own bosses are high achieving women. We are high achieving. We are always looking to grow. We're looking for more. We're grasping for that evolution. And it's great that it is high performance, high achieving. This makes us, this allows us to show up in the world in a really powerful way and create ripples and impacts into the world. So we love that. However, it can turn dark real quick, right? Because many of us have a broken or damaged relationship between achievement and self-worthiness. And what ends up coming up is that we will mistake, seeking out achievement as validation for being good enough, essentially. And so what we know to be true is that it's an unquenchable thirst, right? Nothing will ever be enough. And so we want to find a way. And today we're going to talk about the two things that you can do to start to heal that relationship, because I promise that doing so is actually going to ironically make you more creative, more magnetic, and it's going to bring in, more abundance and overflow into your life because the energy behind it gets to change. All right. So I want to start this episode off with just like being super freaking vulnerable with you and sharing this part of me because it has been a journey. It has been a journey. I'm someone who, without realizing it and being someone who is very ambitious, I'm a Capricorn sun. Like, this is my sense of self in many, many ways. I very often or very frequently in my life mistook this relationship around, being able to achieve and create as kind of confirmation or validation to my sense of self, right? And as we'll talk about in this episode, to no one's fault because it's so framed that way. Life is in this way. But as my journey continued in my career and I started to kind of lean into being more as opposed to doing more. So this is something that language that we see a lot in the entrepreneurial space, specifically for women, around learning to make more by being more as opposed to doing more. The reality of our addiction to doing more and our addiction to achievement, kind of arises. And it's normal that it does because it kind of presents itself so that we can heal it. So I know what I'm about to say is kind of mind-blowing, but just stay with me on this. In the summer of 2020, so I started my business in the summer of 2017. So we're talking about 3 years after I started my business. I was rocking and rolling in my business. My business was thriving. Okay, my programs were being sold out. I was teaching so much. I had so many programs, and I was making really good money. In about August of 2020, I had an incredible month. I had an $88,000 month. Okay. I'd never made that much money in cash, by the way. I'm talking cash, not sales, in my career. And that was already like insane. That was, as was reflected back, I was on the frequency of making $1 million a year. A million is about 83K, 84K a month, right? So I was like 88K. And when I was celebrating sharing my month with my mentor, there was a part of me that felt a little bit defeated, and she sensed that energy and she asked, well, why are you feeling the way that you're feeling? And I said, because it's not the 100K month, because back then in that era of the coaching industry, and also, as it's natural for an entrepreneur who's growing and making more money, I was very much like stars in my eyes around making and having my first six-figure cash month, and that was kind of the coveted next milestone in my career. And so much so that it made the 88K, which is insane because it's more than the majority of people make in a year, and I made that in a month. It made that feel like it wasn't enough. And what's crazy about that is that once I actually hit my first 110K month, of course, I celebrated. This was huge, right? But having it wasn't enough. Now, maintaining it and growing it became my next objective. And immediately so much so that even though I celebrated and I let it really sink in, I was already off to the next races, right? To the next race. And very similarly, when I had my first multiple six-figure cash month, where I was like, it was multiple six figures in cash, and still my eyes were on the prize for the 500K because it was the next milestone. And so what ended up happening is inevitably, right? I realized like I was chasing. Now, there's nothing wrong with growth and achieving and all of the things. I think this is great. The human brain loves progress. We're always talking about that, right? However, there was something inside of me that was seeking, right? When I was reaching out for more, that it needed to mean something, that I was making more money, that I was having more impact, et cetera, et cetera. So one of the things that often comes up, especially because as you're working with mentors, as you're growing your business, you are looking to actually like, you know, grow and make more money. Like it's great that you do. You should want to grow. But the question is always going to be, what is the energy behind that growth? What is that energy behind, moving more? Now, this is important because what I also see is that, I've worked with entrepreneurs for a very, very long time, especially after the fact that, I navigated all that I did, where someone will come to the realization and the awareness that they are hooked on this more, more, and more, and they will incorrectly make the assumption that the solution is to stop reaching for more and just flatline, right? Because I'm done chasing money, I'm done going for more, et cetera, et cetera. When the reality is that it's not that, because shutting down in the opposite extreme of something doesn't resolve it, right? The answer is healing it and getting to be someone who, you get to grow and make more, but from the right energy, right? Where it doesn't feel like you are outside seeking that external validation. So that's what we're going to be talking about in today's episode. So I have my little notes here as per usual. So if you're watching me and you see me kind of look over to the side, just so that I don't forget anything, because this is probably one of the most important episodes so far. I mean, I think they're all important in their own vibe. When in doubt, get hot, super important. But I feel like this is one of those really important episodes because it's just so friggin' common, right? It's so common. And so the first thing I want to talk about is like essentially how it's not your fault, right? Because this is something that is programmed in us. I was having a conversation literally with a client earlier today, and it's like, this is how you learned to operate in the world. There's no shame around it. It's just like step one is to realizing that this addiction to doing more, right, is rooted in something much deeper, much, more kind of, intertwined, like, rabbled in, like kind of wrapped up in, right, your sense of self, essentially. Because first and foremost, this comes from our childhood. We're taught to be a good girl and get the gold star, right? If we perform in a certain way, if we do certain things, if we, achieve certain things, right, we'll get the gold star, we'll get the validation, we'll get the celebration, we'll get the praise, and in, the clearest sense, we'll get the love, right? And so because we're very simple. Humans are very simple creatures. We're very complex in many ways, but there's also this beautiful simplicity to us. And really, ultimately, like, the answer is always love. The answer is always love. So if you were taught essentially, or you learned indirectly that performing in a certain way, would equate to love and appreciation, you are going to naturally learn to operate in that way, because all it is the answer is always love, right? Number one. Number two, we also live in a society, and I've talked about this so many times before. We live in a society where, hustle and results and, all of the success that you create is what's actually rewarded, right? So even if you think about going to school, and you get your good grades, and getting the good grades means that you get your diploma, and then that diploma allows you to go into a university, right, that you then get rewarded with a, entry level job, which then puts you in, the bottom of a ladder that you get to climb. The better you perform, the more you hustle, the more you stay up, or stay late, and show your boss that you're really serious about your business, about your work, about your company, your career, the more you get rewarded. And then there you go, there's a promotion, right? And with the promotion comes more money, and boom, there's more, and there's the appreciation and the recognition. And so we get into these loops, right? So it's inevitable for us to kind of fall into this, because this is the society, this is the reality, right? That we were kind of indoctrinated into, right? And last but not least, if you're in the entrepreneurial space, right, results equal success, right? The numbers, especially if you are in the coaching industry, in the online educational industry, in the content creator economy also, where you are seeing people posting financial results, right? Stamps, like their screenshots from their Stripe account. Now, I'm going to radically own that I played a huge part in this, a few years ago when I was very much in it. I was in it, it was screenshots. It was, look what I've done. Look at the money that I've made. Look at all the people that have signed up for my program. And me, I was part of the problem, right? And also I was like in the loop because I was also influenced by others that were doing it. And it was kind of like this whole thing. And so it's inevitable because it you know what it is? It becomes like this kind of like echo chamber. And that's all that you see. So it's normal that we kind of develop this idea that this is what gets rewarded. This is what equates to success. If I want to be, recognized, celebrated, if I want to be of value, essentially, because obviously the more money I make, the more valuable I am. So all of this becomes like this big mashup. Now, intertwined with any kind of, adolescent conditioning, it's kind of inevitable that we fall into this loop. And the way that it presents itself on the outside is that, okay, well, I just want to make more. I, want to, like, okay, I'm ready for the next milestone. Again, this isn't to say that you shouldn't be aiming and growing on your journey, because it's such a beautiful experience to be able to expand your gifts and reach more people, etc. Like, growth gets to be part of it. But can you see the difference in the energy that fuels that decision, right? And I will tell you what the three things here that will kind of signal that it will never be enough. Number one, you're constantly moving those goalposts, right? It is a constant, like, okay, great, I'm off next, I'm off to the next goal. Number one, whatever you reach, you won't even celebrate. Much like I didn't celebrate 88K, which was insane because I'd never made 88K. I mean, I celebrated it in a sense of I allowed my mentor to share my post that said, that I had made more money in a month than I had ever made. I reshared it, and then when people were like, "Oh my God, that's amazing, Chiara," I was like, "Thank you," But the reality is that number two, I was always kind of a little bit dissatisfied. So the moving of the goalpost, and the not taking the time to actually celebrate what I was experiencing in real time meant that there was always kind of this like underlining energy of dissatisfaction and this thirst that I just kept wanting to fill. Now, this is really important because number three, it leads to burnout. It leads to burnout in the sense that, as we've talked about on the show before, and I've written about this on my Substack as well, anything performative utilizes a lot more of your effort. So if you're out here trying to like magnetize things into your world, attract clients, attract money, etc., you can't do so. It's like it's a mismatch because of all the energy and effort that you are putting out performing and trying to be good enough for this external world. So you're always kind of going to be in this cycle of a burnout. And what this means, and this is my experience, but through this adventure, through this journey, and obviously through the years of helping women navigate this. And again, I'm talking about women who are already making, $50,000 a month, $100,000 a month. I mean, well beyond, like you are already in the 1% of the 1% of the 1%. I mean, it's insane. And yet these are the things that are, plaguing their drive, because that's really what it is, because it like feels like it almost toxifies I don't know if that's a word, but it feels like it's a word, toxifies, the ambition, which is such a beautiful thing. And what ends up happening is that once you burn out, you end up dimming the light and completely turning the dial off on the ambition, almost having shame around it because so much of this chase was attached to it. Right. And so what ends up happening is that you stop sharing your magic, you stop sharing your medicine with the world because you somehow now have shame around the fact that you ever wanted to grow in the first place. Raise your hand, raise your limbs if this is resonating with you, because I really feel like, we've gone through so many versions of this, right? So realized that no external number was ever going to validate me. And number two, that achievement it was always going to lack meaning for me when it was attached to defining my self-worth. And when I tell you that I was so, kind of intertwined with this, that it took me the, year and a half or year long sabbatical hiatus that I took to really fully unravel. And I've shared this, because in my transition from teaching business to working very high level with women in leadership and female entrepreneurs, right, meant that I needed to stop leading with all of the money that I had created. I had to stop leading with that as like evidence that I was good enough. And I had to literally trust in my own value as a mentor, as a human, as a woman who has experienced so much in my life. And it was not easy. I talked about this in a Substack that I wrote around like mourning and grieving an old version of myself that I had to really let go of in order for me to step into this higher level. Because the kind of women that I work with now, if I went to them and was like, okay, but I did, 1.6 in 12 months, whatever, started kind of talking about all the millions of dollars and all things like, ha ha ha, want to work with me now. The reality is that oftentimes women at that level, and honestly, for all of us really, like once you've started making money in your business, starting is the hardest part because once you've actually started, you know how to make money. That's not the hard part. In fact, you're not necessarily looking for someone to teach you how to make more because you're seasoned enough, you've experienced enough, you've made enough money enough, right? Where it's not that you need to like amplify, even though that attachment to achievement has us seeking that. So what I ended up doing actually when I at the very end of me still using that as a way to attract clients is I was attracting women who needed that money to be the validation for their work, right? So it's always going to be a match, everyone that you attract based on everything that you put out. And what I realized in my own transition out, and this is important because it showed me like my own growth and evolution is that I wanted to work with women who sure like want to make more money because who doesn't want to make more money? It's so fun and we get to play with all the ways that we get to make more money. However, the drive, the ambition is to be the best version of themselves, is to contribute their work to the highest caliber, right? To be, to optimize their business and their work in such a way that it gets to not only reach, but help many, many more people. These are the women that I like to work with. But in order to attract them, I had to unravel from my own addiction to achievement because I was just like affronting it. It was like, hey, by the way, I've made multiple seven figures and da 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 da. Like, it was such a part of who I was because I didn't know how to operate in in any other way, essentially, right? So let's riff on the, kind of two things that I think are necessary in order for us to start to unravel from this. So the first thing is just like knowing before we even get into that, knowing that, and I was saying this to my client today, you know, no shame around it because this is such a part of the journey. And I think a lot of us, even when we're starting out in this, it's not like we enter entrepreneurship enlightened. I always say entrepreneurship is the most confronting path, is one of the most confronting paths that anyone can take because it's so real and raw and like not only asks us, but ultimately demands of us, right? It demands us to face our monsters, to navigate, to heal, to grow beyond, to, fix whatever feels damaged and broken because so much of our ability to get our stuff out into the world relies on our willingness to do the internal work, right? And so the first thing is like, don't judge yourself for it, just acknowledge it, right? There's no judgment that's necessarily just realize like, wow, I've really been moving going through my life needing it to be more, more, more. And also, I refuse to let the solution be to just kind of freeze and not do anything. Obviously, freezing, quote unquote, or taking a step back from a place of intention is really great. And it's not to say like, don't, take a breather, take a moment, like, and recalibrate. I think that's really valuable. I don't know that I'd be able to even be sitting here and talking to you in the way that I am if I hadn't taken, the year and a half off to kind of come home to myself and my work in the way that I have, right? However, there's a difference between taking an intentional step back to renourish and replenish and ultimately just freezing and saying, well, money doesn't matter. And I go, well, if money, I've said this to clients before, I'm like, if money doesn't matter, then make this a hobby. Don't make this a business, right? Go get a paycheck from someone that's going to give you money every 2 weeks and make this easy on yourself because, running a business is about money, not only about your own taking care of your own family and your own well being, but as you grow, you're gonna have a team to support. You have, and ultimately, the bigger you're able to get, and the more money that supports that bigness and expansion, the more people you're able to reach and help. So growth and money kind of go hand in hand, and there shouldn't be any shame around that. Right. However, we have to be able to kind of acknowledge and see things. I'm always saying, like, this is what makes Girl Be Bold podcast is like our ability to be brutally honest with ourselves and be like, wow, like, I'm in this limbo right now and I need to do something about it. Okay, this is the relationship that I've had with achievement thus far. And this is how I choose to do things differently moving forward. And I think this is really, really important because what I don't want for you is for you to give up, to quit, to feel like you have to redirect yourself or go earn less for some reason because now you've caught yourself being so attached to the external validation that you're ashamed of it. Like we don't want that. We're here for the growth. That's what the whole point of this is, right? And so when I think about it, there's kind of two different things that, really supported me in my journey. And I think also is kind of like the way that I help my clients navigate this again from every which level. We're talking about women who are making, you know, six figures to making multiple seven figures, right? Like this is something that we navigate at many, many layers because this is a constant thing. I was sharing with my client as well. I'm like, all of the stuff still comes up for me. I have to navigate it and just be really intentional when it does. That's the difference. So we become aware. The first thing is really like turning inwards and falling back in love with yourself. And as corny as this sounds, the self-love, self-appreciation, self-value, self-confidence, like all of the self, like your relationship with self being prioritized and ultimately like seeing and recognizing your fullness from the inside out is going to inevitably be the solution no matter what, because of the fact that you're no longer going to be seeking that validation from the outside in. And this is really, really important when we are in this kind of, especially when you're an entrepreneur, especially when you are putting things out into the world, because a lot of that can feel really tricky and become transactional very quickly, meaning your self-worth is, you're very much going to feel like every product or service or offer that you put out is essentially you putting yourself on a silver platter and being like, hey, like, am I good enough? And then if someone doesn't buy it and you're like, oh my God, I'm not good enough, like, oh my God, like, what am I doing? And then this becomes a cycle. So we don't want that to be in the forefront of your mind. We want, the thing to be in the forefront of your mind to be, how you're helping the world, how you're contributing, like the service that you are offering, the way that you are making the world a better place, essentially, cracking your heart open and allowing your gifts to flow through and go help the collective. That should be the priority, not to, confront. This isn't like an ego raise, right? This isn't all about confirmation of your ego. So self-love. And, I feel like this warrants, by the way, an entire episode because oftentimes, like, I wish I could go, so soul deep into like self-love practices, but, we're coming to the close of this episode. So I want to be intentional about it. However, and we will, by the way, dedicate an entire episode or much more to self-love. But what I will say is really number one, spending a lot of time with yourself and getting to know yourself, right? Giving yourself your needs and mothering yourself and nurturing yourself and honoring like not just your desires, but really like your own, the depths of your needs, right? And what you feel like you need to feel like you are nourished and full. So taking that and honoring that within yourself, taking time to journal and connect with yourself, get to know yourself, really share like the areas of your life where you feel these insecurities or feelings of inadequacies, and really getting curious around how to actually fill that cup for yourself, because there's always ways of doing so. Meditation, taking care of your spiritual connection is also going to make you feel much more full in the way that you navigate the world, because you have the sense of connection to something much bigger than yourself. And so anytime that happens, you kind of allow yourself to outgrow whatever your immediate ego needs are, because you are just in of service to something so much bigger. And it's such a powerful tool. So I think meditation, religion, spirituality, whatever, however you define it, whatever your own definition of divinity is, this is available to you. So anything where you get to prioritize self-love, I think is going to have an impact. And the second thing, and this is something that I did, that's a little bit more tangible, but I think was really valuable and really, it really allowed me, number one, to feel a little bit more in control over what I was feeling, because I think the thing that happens is like the moment you become aware of it. So you feel it, you feel the burnout, you feel the dissatisfaction, you feel all the symptoms as they're actually happening, as you're like grabbing and grabbing and grabbing for more. But then there's the next step is like when you realize it and you're just like, and you don't know like what to do about it. It can feel really disempowering, because you feel very much like out of control in that scenario, and you're like, well, what do I do, right, if I'm constantly grabbing for more? How do I fix this? And essentially something that I did was that I redefined my own definition of achievement, meaning I stopped basing, my achievement on like the results that I was, achieving. So whether it was money or how many clients I had or how many programs I was able to sell out, how many followers, like all these metrics, these external metrics, I stopped tracking them in a sense that I wasn't allowing that to kind of dictate, my worth. But what I was doing instead was I made the commitment of showing up 100%, of giving something my absolute focus, my absolute devotion and commitment. I also had this dedication to showing up with my heart cracked open. And for me, if I was able to do that, if I was able to create posts, record podcasts, host events, run programs, knowing that I was giving it my all, knowing that I was showing up in like the utmost devotion, that I was showing up with this like commitment and like, ultimately this like focus on my contribution to the collective, I would deem that an achievement, and that would make me feel whole and full. And that was my own internal validation, because this is a standard that I had set for myself that I was actually able to achieve. And I was proud of that. And what ended up happening, obviously and inevitably, is like when I shifted my energy in that way, believe it or not, my business skyrocketed even more. Right. Because it was no longer about that. It was about, connecting in a sense of, purpose. And again, when we're talking about achievement lacking meaning, which is what I mentioned earlier in the episode, ultimately, and I've talked about this as well, if you haven't read A Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, I like this is my number one recommendation, especially to entrepreneurs, because specifically the power of meaning and purpose, and the meaning specifically that we assign the way that we live our lives and the environments and the actions and the, the paths that we take and everything, like that, the level of fulfillment, right? When you are starting to measure your success by that, as opposed to the external results, you realize you stop relying on the external results. And that's what makes it really powerful. So if you were someone who is looking to grow, I don't want you to feel like, there has to be a toxic relationship with growth and evolution and more. You get to have more. Absolutely. You get to reach more people. You get to earn more money. You get to expand, right? And it gets to be about who you are in the process of becoming, right? And this is really where the energy of making more by being more as opposed to doing more comes in, because doing more is always going to be operating on a capped amount of energy that you have to output into the world. And you're always going to feel exhausted. You're always going to feel burned out. And ultimately, soul is always going to want to resist that because it's not the holiest, most aligned expression of its value because you are inherently worthy. You are inherently infinitely worthy. And this is where the magic then officially begins. All right. So I hope today's episode was exactly what you needed to hear. This was a special one, I think, for me to record. And I hope it was exactly it. And I will see you in the next episode of the show.